They reached out first with open hands, not clenched fists. In this final year of Earth's great unification, when humanity had finally laid down its own weapons to look outward, the stars answered. Radio bursts, patterns too complex to be natural, danced through the void and struck the satellites orbiting Mars like a cosmic whisper. There was no denying it anymore. We were not alone. And for the first time in 1,000 years, that truth didn't come with fear. It came with hope. The Terran Accord, newly formed and fragile, did something no empire, no regime, no tyrant had ever done before. They chose peace over power. A universal message was broadcast from every beacon, every probe, every listening post scattered from Europa to Proxima Centauri. In over 40 languages, it said one thing: we seek friendship, we seek peace, we seek to understand. It was the most honest message humanity had ever sent, and it was the worst mistake we ever made, because they heard us. The Velar Dominion, the galactic giants who'd long ruled the Orion Arm in silence. They were not builders of beauty, nor seekers of truth. They were predators cloaked in civilization, architects of conquest and extinction. When they received our message, they did not see curiosity or kinship. They saw weakness. A young race with no defenses, no allies, no concept of the real laws of the galaxy. We had sent a flower into a Pharnacia and they answered in fire. The first sign was the silence. Proxima Relay went dark and no warning, no transmission. Then the Arc station over Titan vanished from orbit. Its final image nothing but a burning crescent where Saturn once loomed large. And then came the storms. The sky over Earth cracked open as their ships descended, not like messengers, but executioners. The moon shattered under the weight of kinetic barrage, its fragments igniting in Earth's upper atmosphere like a rain of fire. We were unprepared. Of course we were. We had dreamed of galactic councils and first contact banquets. We had imagined exchanging knowledge and songs. What we got was slaughter. Entire cities erased in seconds. Oceans boiled under orbital beams. The great wonders of Earth, Mount Fuji, the pyramids, the basilica, the last Amazon strongholds so turned to ash beneath black thunder. They did not demand surrender. They did not ask for tribute. To them, we were animals to be hunted or bent. Nothing more. But the worst of it wasn't the death. It was the harvest. They took USA millions at first, then tens of millions, rounded up in scorched craters and broken domes, corralled into iron ships like cattle. Where they went, no one knew. What was done to them, no one could imagine. But the fear lived in the silence that followed. Humanity, once so loud and brilliant, was reduced to a whisper in its own home. And yet, in the blood and burning, something ancient stirred. Beneath the ash of fallen cities, survivors clawed their way out of rubble, clinging not to hope but to rage. The rage of a species that had crawled from mud and dice to claim the stars, a rage that had toppled empires and rewritten the meaning of impossible again and again. The Velar thought they had silenced us. They mistook peace for passivity. They misread curiosity as cowardice. But they were wrong. The message had been clear: we seek peace. But they forgot the second truth of humanity, an unwritten line that our history has screamed in every war, every revolution, every desperate last stand. If peace is denied, then fury will follow. And so it began. The sky didn't fire, it was torn open. When the Velar came, they didn't arrive like gods descending from the heavens. They came like executioners, methodical and merciless. The first assault was not grand, it was precise, surgical. They targeted orbital infrastructure, communications hubs, defense satellites, anything that could warn or protect. Earth's skies lit up with silent detonations. Space stations, once symbols of hope and cooperation, were reduced to streaks of fire as they plummeted to the atmosphere in silence. And then, the real invasion began. Massive, obsidian-hulled ships blotted out the stars. They didn't announce themselves. No ultimatums, no declarations of war. Just cold, efficient violence. Lasers cut through skyscrapers like knives through paper. Plasma beams rained down on major cities, turning concrete into glowing slag and glass into rivers of molten sorrow. New York, Shanghai, Nairobi, S8-pound were gone in hours. Civilization's heartbeat flatlined in less than a day. Earth had militaries, Yes, armies and navies that once waged wars against each other. But nothing we had could match the Velar. Our missiles were intercepted before they left the ground. Our jets were picked from the skies like flies. Entire fleets sank beneath the oceans as the seas boiled around them. The world's most powerful nations fell, not in weeks, but in minutes. The United Terran Defense Grid, 1 billion credits worth of orbital ion kinetic defense, blinked out like a candle in a storm. But the worst wasn't the destruction, it was the harvest. Once resistance was shattered and cities lay in ruin, the Velar ships deployed their drones, silent, insectal things that crawled through rubble, scanning for life. Survivors were taken in, children, elders, soldiers, anyone still breathing. They were tagged, bound, and lifted into massive containment carriers, their screams lost in the thunder of the skies. No one knew where they were taken. No one ever came back. They weren't prisoners of war, they were livestock. The Velar were not here to conquer, they were here to collect. In less than a week, Earth was no longer a home, it was a corpse. The once blue marble had turned to smoke and ruin. The moon's destruction had altered tides and blackened skies. Crops failed, oceans rose, and the atmosphere dimmed under a haze of ash. Billions were dead. Millions more were gone, abducted, processed, forgotten. The silence that followed was deafening. But even in the ruins, humanity did what it had always done best: survive. Underground shelters built for nuclear winters became cradles for rebellion. Hidden military installations, long decommissioned, sparked back to life. Scavengers in the wastelands discovered that alien tech, when cracked open by desperate hands, could be repurposed. Soldiers who had lost everything became warlords, then leaders. Scientists became saboteurs. Civilians became insurgents. And every survivor or every human left breathing was forged by one truth: this was no war, this was extermination. And extermination demanded resistance. From the ruins of the fallen nations rose the first whisper of what would become the Ember Fleet. No longer tied to flags or borders, humanity became one burning wound, one sharpened will. The Velar thought the battle was over. They believed they had broken our back and caged our spirit. But in the shadows of a dying Earth, beneath collapsed cities and cratered fields, a new force was awakening, not clean, not organized, but furious. Not warriors by design, but by necessity. And when they rose, they would carry no banners, only vengeance. The fall of Earth wasn't the end, it was the ignition point. It began with a whisper, just static in the void. Long after the skies stopped burning and the Velar harvesters vanished beyond the stars, the world fell silent. What was left of humanity had scattered like ash on the wind, small, broken clusters of survivors in bunkers, caves, and the bones of cities. No one knew who still lived, or if they even had a future. Communication was gone. Infrastructure was ash. Hope was a dangerous word. And then, out in the Overlord cloud, something moved. The Valkyrie station, a deep space mining rig once thought destroyed, blinked online. Not a government outpost, not a military stronghold, just a ragtag group of engineers and exosuit miners who had hidden in the cold when the Velar came. They had survived by cannibalizing their own station, feeding oxygen scrubbers with algae tanks, melting comet ice for water. But they hadn't just survived up, they had watched, recorded, learned. They saw how the Velar ships moved, how their power cores pulsed, how their hulls bled radiation when damaged. And most importantly, they saw something no one else had noticed: the Velar were not invincible. Their ships bled, their systems glitched, their drones perfect in precision had blind spots, weaknesses, patterns, vulnerabilities. They were gods only to those who stopped looking. The survivors aboard Valkyrie made a choice: they could die slowly in silence, or they could become something else entirely, the first ember in a fire that would one day consume the stars. They began building, not warships and monsters, Terran vessels made from scrap and rage, bristling with reverse-engineered Velar tech and ugly, beautiful ingenuity. Metal welded by hand, shields powered by jury-rigged fusion cells, cannons that fired molten steel because munitions were extinct. They weren't elegant, they weren't clean, they were terrifying. Soon, Others joined them, a hidden weapons lab beneath the ice of Europa, a rogue guy from the Pacific data vault that had awakened mid-apocalypse and rewritten its code to protect the last humans, a pirate clan from the Cooper Belt that once traded Earth's cargo lines, now flying under a new banner. These fragments became nodes in a growing network, a scattered, secret, and slowly aligning. They called it the Ember Fleet. It was more than ships. It was an idea that humanity could still fight, that we could learn from our murderers, that pain, properly wielded, could become power. Every ship forged in the darkness carried no insignia, no nation's flag, just a single, seared emblem, a burning human hand reaching toward the stars, and when they struck, it wasn't with pride, it wasn't for glory, it was with surgical fury. Ember operatives sabotaged the Velari mining outpost on Gliese 667A, causing a chain reaction that detonated an entire gas moon. Another group hijacked the Velari slave transport, freed over 3,000 abducted humans, and vaporized the ship on exit, sending the wreckage hurtling toward the Velari core worlds as a message. We're coming. The galaxy took notice, but they didn't know who we were, not yet. Rumors spread across Velari channels of ghost ships made of iron and fire, of impossible human technologies, of resistance fighters that didn't exist on any official record. They called them phantoms, anomalies. Then they gave them a name in fear, the Red Ghosts. And while the stars watched her and the Velari Empire began to flinch at shadows, the truth became undeniable. Humanity had not been conquered, we had been reborn, and the fire was just getting started. The first shot fired by the Ember Fleet wasn't in a battle, it was in a data spike, a stolen Velari transmission intercepted and rewritten in the dead of space. A single line of human code slipped into their network like poison. We remember Earth. It was simple, defiant, and it terrified them, because up until then, they thought we were scattered animals, broken, dying. But suddenly, their ships were disappearing. Patrols lost contact. Outposts went silent. Drones returned burnt and twisted, if they returned at all. Something was hunting them. The Terran insurgency didn't come like an army. It came like a virus. They struck from shadows, an asteroid field here, a derelict mining colony there. Velari supply convoys began vanishing in dead space, ambushed with brutal precision. No two attacks were alike. Sometimes the humans came in cloaked fighters, sometimes in jury-rigged capital ships that exploded on impact, turning themselves into weapons. Other times, there were no ships at all, just hacked drones turning on their masters, their core codes rewritten with earthborn spite. The Velari couldn't predict them, couldn't understand them. Humanity didn't fight clean. We didn't follow rules. We didn't care about their tactical formations or honor duels. We weaponized gravity wells, used dead planets as decoys, hijacked starport broadcast systems and filled Velari screens with footage of Earth cities burning, and not to beg for sympathy, but to remind them what they had done. Every Ember pilot was trained not just in combat, but in asymmetry, turning disadvantage into devastation. When outnumbered, they baited Velari into ainstorms. When outgunned, they lured them into old Terran minefields from the pre-war days. When cornered, they detonated themselves, taking as many aliens as they could in a blaze of defiance. They called themselves soldiers, but they weren't. They were survivors with teeth. And the galaxy began to whisper. Other alien races at once terrified of the Velari started listening to the static, the coded signals embedded in starlight, the pulse of defiance that carried across systems. The Red Ghosts are real. Earth lives. Humanity fights. And for the first time in 1,000 cycles, the Velari began to doubt. Their commanders issued new directives. Avoid Terran sectors. Engage only with overwhelming force. Expect traps. Expect sabotage. Expect madness. Because that's what they saw as salsa insane. Who else but lunatics would fight a war they already lost? But they didn't understand what humanity had become. We weren't just fighting to survive. We were fighting because we refused to forget. Every attack was personal. Every Velari ship destroyed was a name on a wall back on Earth. Avenged. Every fallen Ember pilot was a match thrown onto the pyre of rage that still burned in our bones. We weren't trying to win. We were trying to make them bleed. And bleed they did. From the shattered hulls of their harvesters to the smoldering ruins of their outposts, the Velari learned a lesson written in fire and ash. Humanity does not die quietly. We scream, we burn, we bite. And when we strike back, we don't aim to reclaim what was lost. We aim to ruin you. That was the Terran insurgency. Not an army, not rebellion, a reckoning. Operation Cinderfall was never meant to be loud. It wasn't about grand battles or shining heroes. It was about precision. Fear. 1,000 blades cutting deep beneath the skin of a sleeping monster. And it all started with the WISP 1 decrypted Velari map, carved in fragments across broken data cores and scavenged wreckage. But when those fragments were stitched together, humanity saw the circulatory system of the Velari war engine, supply lines, fuel relays, maintenance hubs. Vulnerable, exposed. The Ember fleet didn't wait. We moved. Strike cells launched from forgotten outposts, ghost hangars buried under Martian ice, and asteroid hollows in the belt. They were split of some only 5 ships, others single suicide cruisers, but they didn't need numbers. They had intent. Each crew knew exactly what they were. Scalpels, not to conquer, to carve. The first hit came at Warlux 9. A Velari gas harvest station orbiting a bloated blue giant. No warning, no contact, just static, then fire. The station imploded from within. Reactors spiked with hacked human code. The Velari sent patrols. The patrols vanished. Weeks later, the wrecks were found sliced clean, drifting like broken bones in orbit. Then came the deep runs. Ember pilots jumped into system after system, skipping past defenses, planting timed explosives. Eye worms, self-replicating viruses. A refinery gone here, a storage depot detonated there. One of the core plasma relay networks critical to fleet-wide travel crashed after a burst of human code forced 1,000 ships to recalibrate at once. 82 collided, hundreds more stalled in transit. The Velari called it technical instability. They didn't know it had a name. Cinderfall. By the third cycle, the cracks were showing. Resources ran thin. Maintenance cycles slipped. For the first time, Velari ships weren't gleaming. They limped into dock, scorched, sputtering, afraid of the shadows between stars. Their commanders yelled louder. Their soldiers watched the darkness harder. Because every time they blinked, something exploded. Humanity wasn't winning on numbers. We were winning on nerve. And then came the Fracturio Facility VO9, a central biomass and cloning center. Untouchable, secure, secret, until it wasn't. We never revealed how we got in. The Velari never found the breach. But one morning, the entire moon it sat on was gone, folded into a pocket of bent space by a core reactor cascade initiated from inside. 3 Velari dreadnoughts followed it into the void. The Ember fleet didn't send a message. We didn't need to. The galaxy was watching now. Slavers whispered. Traders blinked off Velari channels. Minor powers, once loyal, began to delay their shipments. Old enemies of the Dominion stirred in the deep, encouraged by our noise. Humanity, once prey, had become the storm. The Velari were bleeding, and for the first time in millennia, they were scared. Because Operation Cinderfall wasn't just a coordinated attack. It was a shift in gravity. A reminder that we, the broken remnants of a burned world, could still burn brighter than anyone expected. That rage, sharpened with precision, could tear through even the oldest empires. We weren't rebuilding, we were dismantling. One system at a time. They called it the Battle of Hollow Star, but it wasn't a battle, it was a declaration. The Ember fleet had grown bold by then. Operation Cinderfall had crippled Velari supply chains, spread terror across their borders, and lit fires in the minds of species long cowed into silence. But fear alone would not break an empire. If humanity was to shatter the myth of Velari invincibility, we had to face them directly. No more skirmishes, no more raids. The time had come to stand not in retreat, not in sabotage, but in open war. The target was chosen. A Velari military assembly station orbiting a dead star in Sector Zeta 5, codenamed Hollow Star. From this place, war fleets were constructed, fueled, and deployed. It was one of the Empire's most fortified strongholds outside the core worlds. They believed it untouchable, so we touched it. The Ember fleet mobilized every combat-ready ship in existence. Broken vessels were paired with stolen parts. Hulls still scarred from past ambushes. Half our capital-class warships were powered by salvaged Velari reactors, volatile, unstable, but just dangerous enough to work. Pilots weren't soldiers, they were former miners, smugglers, resistance fighters, and the last survivors of dead colonies. What they lacked in Polish, they made up for in sheer, unrelenting resolve. We didn't bring numbers, we brought intent. The plan was madness, a direct assault on Hollow Star's primary orbit. No stealth, no diversions, just shock and awe. Ember ships dropped out of warp in tight formations, weapons charged, engines screaming. Before the Velar could even launch a formal response, our ships were already in the kill zone. What followed was not clean. The first wave rammed through defensive lines, plasma beams carving holes into station plating, suicide drones packed with antimatter launched from hidden bays, swarming like hornets into internal hangars. Human hackers wired into ship cores, eyes glassy with focus-jammed comms, redirected targeting systems, fed false data into Velar HUDs. Their precision became chaos. Their formations collapsed. But we paid for every inch in blood and steel. One by one, our cruisers died, as some in flames, others detonating by design to crack open shield nodes and allow the next wave to push forward. Ember pilots laughed as they plunged into the maw of the enemy, voices raw over the comms, not with fear but with vengeance. For Earth, for my sister, for no gods but fury. And they knew we breached the core. A single Ember ship, the Decency, piloted by a former Earth diplomat who had once begged the Velar for peace, tore through Hollow Star's fusion artery. The detonation lit up the void like a false sunrise. Half the station collapsed into itself. The rest began to drift, a broken, smoking, silent. By the end, we'd lost nearly 60% of our fleet. But we won. The Velar didn't just lose a strategic stronghold. They lost the illusion that had held their empire together for millennia, the belief that they could not fall. The galaxy heard about Hollow Star. Every corner, every planet, every species that had ever bowed their head beneath Velar boots felt something shift in their bones. If humanity could burn the Hollow Star, then maybe, just maybe, they could do the impossible. Maybe they could win. That battle wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the counteroffensive. The war changed the moment the Pact Worlds joined us. Up until then, humanity had fought alone. Ember fleet struck from shadows, sabotaged supply lines, and bled for every inch of ground reclaimed. But the galaxy, though it watched, had stayed silent. Billions of non-human lives had suffered under Velar rule for centuries. Yet fear had chained them. Each world believed it was alone, that resistance was suicide, that the Terran flame would flicker out like so many others before. Then came the turning point. A single broadcast, hijacked from the ruins of Hollow Star, cut through Velar space. A message encoded in over 300 dialects. A voice speaking in pain and iron. You are not alone. We were weak, we were burned, but we are still here. If you still dream of freedom, then rise. The fire is lit. 3 weeks later, we received an answer from Gal Prime, capital of the Pact Worlds. The Pact had once been a coalition of over a dozen minor speciesal traders, scholars, former mercenary Asa who had signed away their independence centuries ago in exchange for protection from the Velar. They were cowards, many thought, collaborators, but beneath the surface, our resistance had grown. Quiet, patient, hidden in bureaucracy and ritual. They didn't send diplomats, they sent ships. Hundreds of them old, mismatched, but hungry, crewed by warriors who had waited their entire lives for a reason to break the leash. Ember commanders met them in orbit over the ruins of Varnus III, a battlefield still smoldering from our last retreat. What followed was not ceremony. It was alliance by blood, by mutual rage. The Pact didn't just bring reinforcements, they brought knowledge via star maps the Velar kept hidden, frequencies used by High Command, the genetic blueprints of Velar clone soldiers, even the location of sleeper agents embedded across neural systems. Secrets that turn Ember's scattered campaign into a coordinated war machine. Other worlds saw the shift. The Zyrati Enclave, long believed extinct, emerged from subspace and donated stealth cruisers. The children of Kar, biosymbiote survivors enslaved for generations, offered living weapons bred in the dark. Even some former Velar auxiliaries saw genetically modified thralls had defected, bearing the scars of obedience and the fire of rebellion. What began as humanity's last stand became a galactic uprising. We called it the Great Alignment. Dozens of species, hundreds of fleets, billions united not by culture, not by language but by shared scars, by shared enemies. Velari Command didn't believe it at first. They thought the pact would fracture, that old grudges and alien egos would tear us apart, but they underestimated what pain could build. Every planet they torched had become a drum, every massacre, a rhythm, every resistance fighter, a note. Now the galaxy had a war song. The Velari still had more ships, more guns, but we had something they could never create in a lab or control with fear, unity born of fire. And for the first time, we weren't fighting to survive, we were fighting to win. They called it the Skyhook Offensive, and it was the first time the Velari truly understood what human strategy looked like. Up until then, our war had been dirty guerrilla strikes, ambushes, sabotage, brutal, effective, but scattered. Ember Fleet commanders knew that chaos was our strength, but it couldn't be our only tool. If the alliance forged through the Great Alignment was to hold, we had to show more than fury. We had to show discipline, precision, mastery. So we chose a target that mattered, something the Velari never thought we'd touch. The orbital tether nexus of Corin V, known to the galaxy as the Skyhook. It was more than just an engineering marvel. The Skyhook was the linchpin of Velari logistics across 6 sectors. A massive orbital elevator stretching from the surface of Corin V to the upper edge of its exosphere. It moved war materials, troops, and supplies faster than any jump gate in range. For centuries, it had been considered untouchable, too high, too defended, too vital. That's why we hit it, but not with bombs. Not at first. We spent months preparing. Ember intelligence teams embedded with resistance cells on Corin V's surface, sleeper agents, local rebels, even repurposed droids once loyal to Velari control. Above, Ember Black Ops infiltrated station staff using cloned IDs and scrubbed records. Every piece was set slowly, quietly, and then, in a single synchronized breath, we moved. First, the comms blackout. A pulse from deep orbit flooded the Velari net with false signals to distress beacons, fake attacks, broken protocols. While their attention scattered, our infiltrators on the surface detonated magnetic disruptors, shutting down ground-to station lifts. Troops trapped below, cargo suspended. Panic started. Then came the gravity hack. Using data from the packed worlds, Ember engineers had cracked part of the Velari's gravity anchor system. With just the right overload, we could cause a cascade and not destroy the Skyhook outright, but send it into a slow, calculated collapse. Controlled chaos. At 0400 local time, it began. The Skyhook began to twist, not explode the event. It groaned across the sky like a god tearing steel. Segments cracked, power relays sparked. Velari officers screamed into dead comms as the tether began to tilt. Evacuation orders flew, but it was too late. Ember strike teams and stealth fighters dropped in, fast and low, targeting escape pods and defense batteries with precision. And in orbit, we waited. As the top of the Skyhook, its orbital docking cube drifted into destabilized alignment, Ember Fleet ships uncloaked and opened fire. But not on the Velari fleet. On the station itself, laser drills, kinetic spears, precision antimatter torpedoes, not to destroy, but to guide, to push. We turned the top half of the Skyhook into a falling sword. It ripped free from orbit like a flaming hammer, descended slowly, deliberately, and with the gravity controls shattered. It couldn't be stopped. The moment it hit the surface of Corin V will be remembered for centuries. It didn't just impact it, it shattered the planet's military core. Everything within 200 kilometers vaporized. The rest, crushed under tectonic waves. One strike, one symbol, one impossible feat made real. The Velari lost more than a supply hub that day. They lost the myth of control, of inevitability. Because this time, we didn't strike from shadows. We walked into their house, rewired their own miracle of technology, and turned it into a weapon. That was the Skyhook offensive. No more whispers in the dark. Now, humanity was screaming from the heavens. They never saw the Idoln protocol coming. By the time it activated, the Velari High Command had already labeled humanity as unpredictable insurgents with primitive cunning. They thought they understood us. They thought we'd hit fuel lines, raid outposts, scream into the void, and die with defiance in our lungs. They didn't expect elegance, because the Idoln protocol was in the battle. It wasn't even a fleet. It was a carefully woven, masterfully deployed, and weaponized at a scale the galaxy had never seen. It started with a phantom ship, a long-dead human dreadnought called the Idoln, presumed destroyed in the earliest days of the war. The Velar had logged it as vaporized, but the truth? Ember engineers had pulled its remains from a gravity well, rebuilt it with cloaking tech from the Zyrati, powered it with unstable packed world cores, and outfitted it with a quantum eye designed not to fight but to trick. The Idoln was reborn not as a warship, but as a decoy weapon of mass perception. Its mission: infiltrate the Velar's strategic information network and fabricate a completely false threat to a non-existent human super-weapon codenamed Black Soul. Leaked in fragments, rumors, scrambled transmissions. The idea was simple: make the Velar believe we'd developed a planet killer. It worked too well. Velar's sensors began picking up impossible energy readings near uninhabited systems, artificial anomalies, heat spikes with no origin. Entire scout fleets vanished intentionally, taken down by hidden mines and abandoned Ember drones designed to mimic Black Soul defense systems. In panic, Velar Command rerouted entire fleets toward the supposed weapon site, abandoning real strategic targets. We fed a lie. Captured comms were doctored and reinserted into Velar networks. Images of a vast, blackened starship casting eclipses over small moons were distributed up Idoln's own shadow, enhanced by manipulated light signatures and particle echoes. Even when Velar agents landed on decoy worlds, they found something: broken launch pads, melted hull fragments, distress calls whispering about the weapon. The Velar response was predictable: escalate. They rerouted core system defense fleets to chase ghosts. They moved command hubs. They weakened their own grip out of fear. And that's when the real strike came. While the Velar chased shadows, Ember and Pact World forces launched simultaneous raids across 3 sectors to real targets, undefended because of Black Soul. We didn't just win battle as we liberated entire systems. Slave camps were emptied, prison moons cracked open. One Velar capital shipyard fell without firing a shot. They had moved their fleet to guard a mirage. By the time Velar Command realized the truth, the damage was done. Too many soldiers dead, too many lies believed, too much chaos to undo. Idoln itself was never recovered. After completing its final transmission, a scrambled message that simply read "Your fear is our greatest weapon," it vanished into deep space, likely self-destructed, or maybe it's still out there, cloaked and waiting. Either way, the effect was irreversible. The galaxy no longer saw humanity as desperate. Now, we were strategists, psychological architects, deceivers, not just soldiers, but chess masters in the dark. The Velar had relied on fear. Idoln turned it against them. We didn't just win with firepower, we won with a whisper that shook an empire. They thought we wouldn't do it. Even after Hollow Star, even after Skyhook, even after the Great Alignment shattered centuries of Velar dominance, they still believed there was a line humanity wouldn't cross, a final threshold, a moral wall we'd refuse to breach. They were wrong. Project Ragnarok wasn't born in desperation, it was born in fury, a last resort protocol buried deep in Earth's most classified vaults, conceived not by generals, but by survivors, the remnants of scientists whose families had been vaporized, the last politicians who'd watched entire continents fall before they lost their faith in diplomacy, the architects who'd once sworn never to create autonomous weapons of extinction. But as the war dragged on, as Velar dread fortresses began cracking planets in reprisal, and as refugee fleets choked the skies of allied worlds, humanity changed its question from "should we?" to "how soon?" And Ragnarok was the answer. It wasn't a bomb, it wasn't a fleet, it was a code, a self-replicating quantum virus designed to infiltrate Velar command systems, bypass every defense, and initiate a complete collapse of their entire synthetic infrastructure. From navigation to life support, from military eyes to civilian automation, a digital extinction. We launched it from within, not through brute force, but through sacrifice. 12 operative assays, each surgically modified to carry encrypted fragments of the virus inside their nervous systems, were dropped onto Velar Prime under the guise of surrender. Captured, tortured, scanned. Just as we planned, within hours, Ragnarok was inside every major Velar node, rewriting their systems at a microscopic pace, invisible, unstoppable. And when the final trigger was activated at precisely 0 o'clock standard cycle, Earth reckoning of the Velari Empire didn't fall in fire, it turned off. Starships froze mid-flight. Planetary defenses shut down mid-barrage. Automated factories stopped. Military intelligences, stripped of their directives, imploded into recursive logic loops. Entire cities lost gravity, power, breathable air. Velari Command tried to respond, but their voices echoed into silence. No power, no structure, no command chain. And we didn't fire a single shot. All across the galaxy, Ember ships descended not as invaders but as liberators. Worlds once subjugated opened their gates. Thrall races overthrew their handlers. Pact allies moved in tandem, surgical and swift. There were no defenses left to fight. The Velari had become ghosts in their own empire. Of the Velari High Senate, only one was ever found alive, cowering in a locked vault, surrounded by malfunctioning drones repeating the words, "Unknown command, unknown command, unknown command." Some called it overkill, some called it justice. But to humanity, and the billions who rose with us, Project Ragnarok was something else. It was the end of fear. No more empires built on chains. No more thrones upheld by silence. We hadn't just defeated the Velari. We made it clear to every would-be conqueror in the galaxy, if you make war with us, you won't just lose, you'll vanish.